But the main point is that monetary extravagance possesses an altogether different meaning and a completely new aura when compared with extravagance with regard to concrete objects. The latter implies that its value for the rational sequence of purposes of the individual is simply destroyed, whereas the former implies that value is, in an inexpedient way, transposed into other values. The only type of squanderer in the money economy who is significant for the philosophy of money is not a person who senselessly gives away money in natura, but rather one who uses it for nonsensical purchases that are unsuited to his circumstances. The pleasure associated with squandering is attached to the moment of spending money upon any object whatsoever, and has to be distinguished from the pleasure provided by the fleeting enjoyment of objects, from the snobbery to which it is related, from the stimulating change between acquisition and use of objects. Rather, it relates to the pure function of squandering without regard for its substantial content and attendant circumstances. For the spendthrift, the attraction of the moment of squandering surpasses both the proper appreciation of money as well as of the objects. This specifically highlights the position of the spendthrift in relation to the sequence of purposes. If the final point of the sequence is enjoyment through the ownership of the object, then the first basic intermediate stage is the possession of money, the second is the expenditure of money upon the object. For the miser, the first stage becomes an enjoyable end in itself, for the spendthrift the second stage is the enjoyable one. To the spendthrift money is as important as it is to the miser, though not in the form of owning it but in squandering it. The spendthrift's sense of value depends on the moment of transposition of money into other forms of value, to such an extent that he is willing to pay for the enjoyment of this moment at the price of squandering all more concrete values. It is therefore very noticeable that the indifference towards money value, which constitutes the essence and attraction of extravagance, presupposes this value as something experienced and appreciated. For, obviously, throwing away what is indifferent would itself be completely indifferent. The following case is typical of the wild extravagances of the Ancien Regime. When Prince Conti sent a diamond valued at 4,000 to 5,000 francs to a lady and it was returned to him, he ordered it to be crushed so that he might use it as writing sand for the letter he wrote to her in reply. Taine adds to this story the following remark about the conventions of that period: "On est d'argent plus un du monde que l'on est moins un d'argent." The less one cares about money, the more a man of the world one is. However, this implied a degree of self-deception, for the conscious and emphatic negative attitude towards money is based, as in a dialectical process, on its opposite, which alone can give it significance and attraction. The same is true of certain shops in big cities which, in contrast to those that attract customers by cheap prices, stress with ostentatious self-indulgence that they have the highest prices. They thereby appeal to the finest circles of society who do not ask about prices. What is remarkable about this is that they do not emphasize the main point, the object itself, but rather its negative correlate, that the price is not important, and thereby they unconsciously place money in the foreground of interest again, even though in a negative manner. Because of its close relationship to money, extravagance very easily gains an immense increase in momentum and robs those who are subject to it of all reasonable standards, since the regulation that is given through the measure of receptivity of concrete objects is lacking. Precisely the same extravagance characterizes the avaricious greed for money. Instead of seeking out the enjoyment of real entities, it searches for the intangible, which extends to the infinite and has no external or internal reasons for its restriction. Wherever external positive fixations and barriers are absent, greediness discharges itself quite formlessly and with a growing intensity. This is the reason for the particular relentlessness and embitteredness of inheritance disputes. Because the individual's claim is not determined by work or by a concretely grounded measure, neither party is inclined a priori to acknowledge the claim of the other. There are thus no inhibitions to restrain the claim, and any interference with it is felt to be a completely groundless injustice. The lack of inner relationship between the wish and any measure of its object, which in this case derives from the personal structure of inheritance relations, derives, as far as greed is concerned, from the structure of the object. A revolt against new coinage in Brunswick in 1499 highlights the lack of principles that increases with greed and prevents the reduction of the claims. The authorities thought that, in the future, base money should be replaced by good coinage. And yet the same people who wanted good coinage for their products and as their wages revolted because others refused to accept their payments in base coinage. The frequent coexistence of good and base coinage provides the greatest possibilities for the inner excess of money mania, compared with which, other intense passions always seem to be psychologically based. We know that even in China revolutions occurred because the government paid in base coinage but requested taxes to be paid in good coinage. I assume, purely hypothetically, that this lack of moderation that is part of mere money interest itself is also the hidden root of a peculiar phenomenon found at the stock exchange, namely that the small grain speculators, the outsiders, almost without exception speculate for a rise in market prices. It seems to me that the logically correct but, in practice, irrelevant fact that gains in bear operations are limited, whereas in bull operations they are not, is the psychological motivation for such behavior. Whereas the major grain speculators who actually have to deliver the object calculate the chances of both sides of the market, mere money speculation as is found in speculation in futures is interested in speculating in the one direction, which is potentially infinite. This tendency, which constitutes the internal form of the movement of financial interest, is even better represented by the following. In the period 1830 to 80, German agriculture produced steadily increasing annual returns, which gave rise to the idea that this was an infinite process. Therefore, estates were not bought for a price that corresponded to their current value, but to the expected future profit. This is the reason for the present distressed condition of agriculture. It is the money form of profit which distorts the notion of value. Wherever profit appears only in terms of use value and where only its immediate concrete quantity is taken into account, then the idea of its growth is confined to sober limits, whereas the possibility and anticipation of money value grows infinitely. This is the basis for the essence of greed and squandering, since they both reject in principle the measurement of value that alone can secure a limit and a boundary to the sequence of purposes, namely by the final enjoyment of objects. The genuine spendthrift should not be mistaken for an Epicurean or somebody who is merely frivolous, although all these elements are mixed up in the individual representative. The spendthrift is indifferent towards the object once he possesses it. His enjoyment is doomed never to find repose and permanency. The moment of his possession of an object coincides with the negation of its enjoyment.